how much does a Warhammer 40,000 army really cost? I thought I had a decent inkling of how much they cost, but to be honest, I never really done the math because it's not fun math to do. I have a bunch of armies, I buy a lot of models, and I generally don't like to think about it, but I decided to really investigate, put together a bunch of different army lists, price them all out, and see exactly how much does a Warhammer 40,000 army set you back. Full 2,000 points, tournament legal. In fact, I used tournament winning lists to put this together. So I'm gonna look at a whole bunch of different Warhammer 40,000 armies. At the end, we'll look at one of my Warhammer 40,000 armies and we'll see what kind of a return on investment I got. That was not fun to do the math on that last one. Also, let me know in the comments below, how much do you guys think a Warhammer 40,000 army costs? I went through everything retail, and there's definitely sorta kinda deals to be had. I buy a lot on eBay, I buy a lot of stuff secondhand, and that brings the cost down a bit, but looking at some of these prices, I don't know if it helps that much. Now, historically, there are some Warhammer 40,000 armies that cost more than others. I would say the two biggest offenders are Orcs and Imperial Guard. They're known for being big armies with big blobs of troopers and lots of kind of big, chunky, expensive vehicles. So if any armies are gonna be really, really bad, I would think it's going to be Orcs and Imperial Guard. I found a classic Orc list, Orcs in the Warhorde detachment. This is a classic, kind of green tide with a little bit of mechanization. It's led by Gazgul Mag Uwu Thraka, which costs 80 buckitos, a couple of pain boys, 2 big bricks, a 20 boys, and then we got 2 trucks, 2 battle wagons, 2 things of flash kits, Gretchen, like a little bit of everything. This is a really, really good Orc list. It would be very painful on the WOG turn, and totaling the cost of everything together, this army, to play it competitively at 2,000 points, fully loaded, will set you back $1,190. I knew that it was gonna be up there, but crossing the $1,000 mark and kind of crossing it pretty far, 1,200. Looking at this, there's not a lot of ways of getting a good deal. You can't just get a couple of combat patrols, and the combat patrols save you maybe like 60 bucks. Maybe you could proxy, well, you don't want to proxy Gazgul. Gazgul is expensive, like you want the real Gazi. Maybe you could proxy like the Pain Boys and the War Bosses because those are 35 bucks a pop. And so if you can 3D print those or kit bash or convert those out of like a knobs box, that could save you a little something, but there's not much you can do. $1,190. Now, jumping from Xenos to Imperium, with the Imperial Guard, I found a combined arms detachment with classic Ursula Creed, Cadian Command Squad, Commissar. The big expensive things in this list are 2 Rogel Dorn Tank Commanders, which is just the regular Rogel Dorn kit, but the regular Rogel Dorn kit is $105. It's really, really expensive, really big kit. You got a trio of Khazarkin squads, a trio of Tauroxes. I would bet that those Tauroxes might leave the list because Taurox went from, I think, 60 points to 75 points in game, which is a pretty big points increase. Got some Attilan Rough Riders, got a couple of Leman Russes, the new Tempestus Aquilons. This is a really, really good Imperial Guard list. Once again, it's just a little smattering of everything you'd want. And totaling the retail cost of this list together, getting all this stuff would set you back $1,176, which is really, really close to the Orcs. I think there is something to Orcs and Imperial Guard are very similar in the game. You can kind of take a similar number of things, a similar number of the same types of things, and they're both right around 1,200 buckitos. Definitely really, really painful. Now, those should be the worst, and so that kind of got me thinking, well, what would be the best? Classically, memely, people always say that Adeptus Custodes and Imperial Knights are the cheap way to get into 40k because they're both low model count armies, and so if you don't need as many models, it's just not gonna be as expensive. It took me a while to find a really good Adeptus Custodes list. to price out, because a lot of Custodes lists use some of the Forge World stuff, and that super inflates the price. And a lot of those Forge World stuff are really, 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 really cool. Like the big chunk and dreadnoughts, and the dropship, Aquilon dropship, is a shockingly big miniature and a shockingly expensive miniature. But if you just go right down with the plastic kits, you can actually get a fairly good Adeptus Custodes army. And what's really nice is Adeptus Custodes have very small units, like units of 2s and units of 1s. And so you can actually get away with getting one box, and that sets you up for a couple of different units. This list is led by a Blade Champion, but then it has a Shield Captain and Ilarius Terminator armor, so that's one guy out of the Terminator box, and then you just bring the other 2 guys as their own squad of 2 guys. And so that way you are getting a little bit more bang for your buck. That happens a few times in this list. You need a squad, you need 2 boxes of Dawn Eagle jet bikes, you need a lot of boxes of Custodian Guard, but another good thing about Custodes is there's not that many units, and the Combat Patrol is pretty darn good. Inside of this list, you can very easily fit in a Combat Patrol, and so that saves you like another $60. And so this really nice 2,000 point Adeptus Custodes Lions of the Emperor Spearhead detachment with 2 allies. This list has an allied Inquisitor and an allied Inquisitor Kyria Draxus. And so all totaled up, this one costs $654 if you use the Combat Patrol. That's pretty good. That's quite a bit cheaper than Orcs. That is quite a bit cheaper. Still very expensive. Still very, very expensive. For some reason, Adeptus Custodes, in my mind, it feels like they should be like a couple $100 to put together an Adeptus Custodes army. That's how I would want Adeptus Custodes to play, because each Custodian is so unbelievably magically powerful that you would almost kind of hope your 7 guys could take on a 2,000 point army. But no, it's closer to like 40 models is a Custodes army. And there are a lot of Custodes. I think there's 10,000 Custodian Guard, and so they're bigger than Space Marine chapters, and so spread out into different warbands across the galaxy. There's a lot of Custodes, but I like Custodes when they're really, really powerful. But speaking of things that are really, really powerful, Imperial Knights are known for being a force that you can put together relatively quickly, because you just don't need that many miniatures. Like, you need single-digit numbers of miniatures typically. Now, it doesn't feel as great as Custodes, because you got that sticker shock of each big stomping knight costing like $190, which is pretty bad. Where, almost every Custode kit costs $62.50, but you don't. I spent a long time trying to find a really good Imperial Knights list, and I couldn't find any that I loved. Most of them seem to ally in at least one squad of Battle Sisters, Sisters of Battle Immolator, and at least one Assassin. And then it was just like one big Stomping Knight and a bunch of Armigers. But I did find Chaos Knights have a lot of similarities in their high performing, like competitive lists. And that is almost without fail, 13 War Dogs. That is a Chaos Knight army is 13 or 14 War Dogs. And that's pretty easy to add up because it comes 2 in a box for like $90. And so to bring 13 War Dogs to your battlefield, you need to spend $647.50, which is very, very similar to the Adeptus Custodes. Like, it's weird that Orcs and Guard were like identical, and then it's really weird that Knights and Custodes are basically identical too. And if you want to get into Warhammer, I guess, and your goal is to get into it as cheaply as you can, I guess Knights and Custodes are a way to do that. I mean, you have to like those factions, otherwise it's not going to work. If you're like, I have no interest in Imperial Knights, but for some reason I need to play Warhammer, and I've only got $600 and I want to be playing as quickly as I possibly can, I guess that's a way to do it. So we've gone with the most expensive, and then we went with hopefully not, but seemingly the cheapest. That kind of got me thinking, what about like age of the model range? Because older kits are much cheaper than brand spanking new Warhammer. And so I looked at some good old-fashioned Drukhari and Leagues of Votann. Drukhari are definitely the oldest like plastic kit range factions in Warhammer 40,000. So I was wondering if you'd save a bunch of money on those kits, that it would bring the overall price of the army down. I found a classic Real Space Raiders list that managed some tournament wins, which is really impressive. Real Space Raiders is not a very good detachment, and this list is only getting 2 extra blood tokens at the start of the game with Lilith Hesperex and an Archon. This list is pretty classic. You got lots of Kabalites, lots of Witches, Court of the Archon and Grotesques, which are hard to come by, but then you've got a lot of Chronos and Talos. You've got 2 one-man Chronos squads, and then you've got 3 pairs of Talos. And every paint engine is 1 per box for like 6250, so 8 of those suckers adds up pretty darn quick. When I'm looking at all of these prices, I'm seeing some cheap stuff. Succubuses are $30, Scourges are $37, Witches squads are $45. That's cheaper than a lot of more modern 40k kits, but you do need a lot of them to get you to 2,000 points. And so totaling all of this up, it is $1,182, and that doesn't include the Grotesques or the Court of the Archon, because Games Workshop hasn't sold those kits in years. So you would just have to proxy or figure something out for those. But yeah, that's orc prices right there. You need so many miniatures. Dark Eldar is very much a horde army, so you're getting a lot of models. You're getting a crazy number of miniatures for that amount of money, but yeah, not looking good. Now, to compare the oldest Warhammer 40,000 faction that's available with the newest, or one of the newest Warhammer 40,000 factions, I picked Leagues of Votann. Leagues of Votann, a lot of the big tournament winning lists were very, very similar because Leagues of Votann does not have very many units at all, so almost every list has everything available to purchase for them. Got a couple of Einir champions, we got 3 Sagittars, 3 Chthonian Berserkers, 2 Einar Hearthguards, 2 Hekatron Land Fortresses, which are very expensive at $118 a pop. I've seen a couple of them in person. It's a very big, cool kit, but it's very expensive. Then we got some Hearthkin Pioneers and a good old-fashioned Jaeger. Totaling all of that up to get you to 2,000 points, it is $1,085.50. A little bit cheaper than some of the other lists we've looked at, but still pretty expensive. I guess Leagues of Votann is a little bit more expensive points-wise, so you don't need as many miniatures. So even though every single box is setting you back more money, you don't need as many boxes to get to a full 2,000 point list. Is that better than more miniatures, more boxes that are cheaper? I don't know. Some armies should feel a little bit more elite, and some armies should feel a little bit more excessive. But yeah, $1,085.50. Still not great. After that, it kind of got me thinking about Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines. And I just wanted to know, what's more expensive? Regular old Space Marines or Chaos Space Marines? But you know what else I was thinking about? That's right, EonsOfBattle.com. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch, like the Nick and J dice. We also have wet pallets, water slide decals, basing bits, and toppers. And it is the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members get a credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain packs or any previous pack we have ever made. This June, we have a Titanic monstrosity. What better way to show off that a battle is serious business than a god machine already dead on the ground? These shattered remains create thematic line-of-sight blocking and ruined terrain, perfect for grimdark games. With a Titanic rigor mortis claw, silent cannon, and lifeless eyes, this beast won't be doing much but looking pretty, while those who are still kicking win the day. This ruined Titan fits right at home with our previous crash spaceship terrain. So what do you guys think is going to be more expensive, Space Marines or Chaos Space Marines? When I was contabulating, I was pretty sure that regular Space Marines were going to be a little bit cheaper than Chaos Space Marines, because I bet you pay a little bit extra for the spikes. Chaos Space Marines are just Space Marines with more spikes, and so I think those spikes are going to cost a little extra. I found a classic Ultramarines Gladius Task Force list, led by Captain in Gravis armor, but featuring Marnius Calgar and Rubute Girly Man. A lot of these named characters are very expensive, but the rest of the list is very, very small. We got some expensive stuff, triple Ballistus Dreadnoughts, because they're really cheap right now in game, not in dollars. They're $70 per dread in dollars. But then we got a Gladiator Reaper, Invader Scout ATV, Vindicator. Really, it's kind of a big vehicle heavy list. And totaling it all together, it is $923. Actually kind of one of the cheaper armies that we've seen today. It doesn't have some things that you might see in like a Blood Angels army, like a big brick of Blade Guard veteran, or what you would see in a Black Templar army, which is big giant Crusader squads and maybe Land Raiders. But it is a good smattering of Space Marine vehicles and heroes. So I think 923 is probably about right for Space Marines. Now, for Chaos Space Marines, I found a Creations of Bile list featuring the man himself, Fabulous Bill, and a Chaos Lord and Cypher. I believe Cypher is a lone op guy, and so he's really good for just doing secondaries and just running around the board doing his business. Now, Chaos Space Marines are a little different than Space Marines in that you can take cultists, and this list has 3 big blobs of cultist mobs, which are $52, which seems expensive for like piddly little human guys, but that's how much they cost. And then the big thing in this list is 3 humongous squads of Possessed Marines. Possessed are $52.50 for 5, and so 3 squads of 10, that's 6 boxes, that adds up quick. And so putting together the pricing for this list is $1,077.50. So I was right, the spikes do cost extra compared to regular vanilla Space Marines, especially the most vanilla Space Marines, Ultramarines. Now, looking at all these different army lists, it's looking like a 2,000 point Warhammer 40,000 army is about $1,000. So then I decided to contabulate the cost of one of my 40k armies, one that I just played with a couple of times over the last weekend, which is my Necrons in Awaken Dynasty. I was thinking this list might be a little extra expensive because it's kind of destroyer heavy. And so I've got a big brick of Locust Destroyers, a big brick of Scorpec Destroyers, 2 big blobs of Immortals, giant 20-man brick of Warriors, and characters out the wazoo. And so adding retail cost of this army, all totaled is $1,180. Now, to be fair, I've collected this army over the last 10 years, a little bit here on eBay, a little bit my friendly local game store, a little bit secondhand shelf. So it probably wasn't that much, but I bet it wasn't too far off of that number. 1,180 buckitos. That kind of got me thinking, well, how bad is that really? Because I didn't just get an army with that money. I got all of the time that it took me to paint and build that army, and it gave me the opportunity to play with that army. So I decided to take all of that time and compare it to that number. So I figured every model takes me about 4 hours, like 1 hour to build it and base it, and about 3 hours to paint it. Sometimes that's a little quicker, sometimes that's a lot more. So I think 4 hours is like a good number to compare it to. This list has 97 miniatures in it, and so that is about 388 hobby hours. Now, I've played 2 games over the last week, and then it was actually my first game of 40k, and then I played another game with my Necrons in like the middle of 10th edition, so that's 4 games. It takes about 3 hours to play a game of 40k, so that's 12 more hours that I can add to 388, so 394 hours of total hobby joy that I have managed to get out of my Necron army. And so, dividing it, that is darn close to $3 per hour of hobby fun. I don't know what that number means, but $3 an hour doesn't sound horrifying. Like, it seems fine. I mean, obviously, it depends on what you compare it to. Like, going to see a movie for 2 hours is kind of expensive. Reading a book that I stole online is pretty cheap. So, I don't know. $3 an hour is about what I get out of my Necron army, although I think if I did the math for my Black Templar, it would be quite a bit better because I've played 4 games with my Necrons versus I've played like 34 games with my Black Templar. So I've definitely gotten a lot of good gaming time out of my Black Templar. Although I have way more Black Templar miniatures than I do Necron miniatures. So I don't know, maybe it is getting close to that $3 an hour figure. Warhammer 40k armies are really expensive. I think that Games Workshop should maybe cut down on the lethality of the game of 40k, which would probably then lead to bringing smaller armies to the battlefield, which I'm sure Games Workshop does not want to do. I'm sure they like people playing at 2,000 points, especially when it's costing these numbers. But I do think there is something to 1,000-point games of 40k. I've played a bunch of 1,000-point games, and if both players are kind of playing along and they don't bring the crazy stuff like Morvenval or Silent King or Angron, it can be a lot of fun. And so obviously that would cut the cost in half for most of these armies, which is still expensive, but not as jaw-droppingly expensive. Let me know in the comments below if you guys have Warhammer 40,000 armies. Do you think that you have gotten your money's worth out of your collections? For my Black Templar, for my Necrons, I think for sure, big thumbs up. I love those armies. Couple of other armies I have, my Gene Stealer Call, my Tyranides. We're still working on it. Thanks for watching.